Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hi there, and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. We will be kicking off episode 19 with a discussion of the 6 seasons of the year. And you thought there were only 4, didn't you? Next, let's catch up on the current status of salmon. And finally, a new film on food provocateur James Beard has us thinking about this big man's great legacy. Today in the studios of OPB, I am joined by Kathleen Squires, a food travel and lifestyle writer and the co-producer of the new documentary, America's First Foodie. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Catherine. Happy to be here.
And Diane Morgan, author of, I think, 18 cookbooks and counting.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Martha Holmberg, a cookbook author and the CEO of the International Association of Culinary Professionals. Hi, Martha.
Hi, Catherine.
Now for our first course. Throughout human history, it has been a given that there are 4 seasons in a year. Now, Martha Holmberg, you have written a book with Chef Joshua McFadden of the Portland restaurants Ava Jean's and Tusk, entitled 6 Seasons, A New Way with Vegetables. So what gives? Can you start out by telling us what the 6 seasons are?
We sort of expanded the middle, more productive month. So we have winter, we have fall, going backwards, and then we have the end of summer, the middle of summer, the beginning of summer. Those, to me, are 3 distinct seasons. And then spring, of course. There's just so much that happens between once the earth warms up to past 50 degrees, and once it starts getting cold again, that it's too much good stuff to cram into just one season of summer.
Aha. So, Martha, it's going to be toward the end of May when this episode goes live. So what season will we be in?
End of May. Well, the seasons are a little bit of an artificial construct, as I learned when we were trying to figure out which vegetables go exactly in which season, because a lot of that depends on where you are, what the year is like. But end of May around here, I think we're stepping into early summer. We're starting to see a few more things than just maybe the lettuces, the new greens, the asparagus. We're getting to where we'll probably have a few strawberries, and we're going to get more of the array of vegetables.
Yum. I love strawberries. Now, Kathleen, you also have a new cookbook about greens, so it sounds like this might be your season as well.
Yes, absolutely. Although you can get greens all year long, but in the Book of Greens, which I co-authored with Portland chef Jen Lewis of Ray Restaurant, brand new on the scene, I think it's interesting. I think what Martha says is completely true, that, you have a lot of vegetables and greens and foods that span the season. So it is wrong to say that, let's say that collards are only a winter vegetable or winter green. They can go into spring. And what you'll get at the beginning of spring is very different than what you're getting at the end of spring.
Well, Kathleen, I'm seeing that right now in my own garden. I have some raised beds that, of course, have just been sitting there ignored for months and months, and they need a lot of spring rehabilitation. But the collards and kale that we had planted last fall and that gave us a lovely cold weather crop, they're rejuvenating, and there's these beautiful, tender, little perfect leaves that the bugs haven't found yet, so there's no bug holes. It's true that some of these things kind of give you two rounds.
Exactly.
And we actually have 3 vegetable experts in the room right now. Because, Diane, you're like the world's expert on root vegetables, aren't you?
Yeah, I take the underground route. But that said, roots, as we think of as wintertime vegetables, actually bridge from fall into spring and even early summer, because then you start seeing the small Tokyo turnips, which are lovely, and you can use the turnip tops, and carrots. And, yes, they're a storage root, but they also, when they're fresh out of the ground, they just taste beautifully. And we've been nushing on radishes, and I've made 2 batches of radish top soup. So it's just that rebirth and what's, and especially with all the greens that come with it.
You know what I love about this trend in all three of your books, and Martha, I was just looking through your beautiful cookbook, is you see very little meat. I mean, you can have a really satisfying, beautiful meal without, with just having meat as like a tiny little side accompaniment, it seems like.
Absolutely. You don't want too much competition for all these fantastic vegetable recipes that you can have. And I find, I would never be a raw eater. I like to have savoriness. I like meat and things like that. But I find if I just have a little bit of cheese, maybe some nuts, to something, a little tiny hit of richness, or maybe, as you say, like little pancetta bits, then that satisfies that. And then the rest of the dish can just be fantastic vegetables.
Well, Martha and Diane, what I think is really interesting about what we're all doing is that we're bringing vegetables back to the center of the plate as opposed to as the side dish, and but also not necessarily vegetarian. I mean, the Book of Greens that I've written is not a vegetarian book, although it sounds like it might be, but it's about incorporating greens into your whole diet, whether you're a meat eater or not. And I'm sure the same thing with your work as well.
Yeah, I'd support that, Kathleen. That was truly my aim in Roots, that there are meat dishes that include roots, but there's also plenty that don't. And I kind of played with beyond what people think of as winter soups and stews is like so many of these things, like celery root you can eat raw, and so celebrate that. And even though it feels like a wintertime book, I still love a salad in the winter, and so use those. Even beets. We think we roast them, but they're fabulous raw.
Oh, yeah. I do think we need a little bit of re-education, though, because, and I was struggling with this when I was trying to categorize, like, is this a main dish? Is this a side dish? Is this a starter? Because surprisingly, there are still people who are like, well, I want the main protein and the two sides. So what do I do with, I'm not used to eating a quote-unquote salad as my main, my main dish. And not to disparage another gender, but I tend to think that it's men who have that feeling because they just feel like they're not going to get filled up with, vegetables or salady thing in the middle of the plate. But they are wrong, as we have all demonstrated in our recipes.
What's interesting, Martha, is kind of I wouldn't even say comeback, because where I'm from, I live in New York City. We're having this resurgence of what's called the meat and three, which is a very Southern style way to eat. And it's you have your meat and your three side dishes. And so we have a couple of restaurants that have opened in New York City that are meat and threes that are kind of going against just what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. It's retro now instead of the main thing.
Exactly.
Are there any tricks to cooking vegetables that you think that the general public needs to know? I feel like everyone thinks they know how to cook a steak, but they look at certain vegetables and they think, oh, all I can do is steam it and then it's disgusting and then I don't want to eat it. So what are some tricks we all need to know?
For me, the thing that will make any vegetable taste good, no matter what you've done to it, is really great olive oil and a lot of salt. And I think that sure, you want to celebrate the essential nature of the vegetable, but you want to season it, And I also think that people have been kind of trained to not overcook their vegetables because we have the old stories of, soggy, boiled, whatever. And so sometimes they're afraid to cook them enough. For example, green beans. I don't like a crisp, tender green bean. I like my green beans cooked a little bit longer because that's when it develops this really satiny texture and the flavors get sweeter. So, there's not one trick across the board other than just buying really fresh, good stuff and seasoning it well. But I think being not afraid to gut out of the box in terms of what cooking methods you're going to do.
Thank you, Martha, for permission to overcook my green beans. I totally do that. I love it. It's delicious.
Oh, it's so much better.
How about you, Diane? What's the secret that we all need to know about?
Well, I think, and I've been doing this a lot even through the winter, is I love to grill roast root vegetables. So I put sweet potatoes on the grill. I just poke them with a fork, rub them with olive oil, and you either put them off on indirect heat Or if you have an upper rack in your grill, you can stick them up there and just let them grill roast. So they pick up a little bit of that lovely smoke. And I'll just, I do that with new potatoes. And I also will wrap beets in foil and do them that way. And I kind of open up the foil like for the last 15 minutes. And so don't forget about the grill when it comes to vegetables.
I was going to say, I love those ideas because you just don't think of like grilling a dense root vegetable, but as you say, they're fantastic. Yeah, it can be eye-opening.
And even during this time of year, think about just how lovely a grilled half of romaine is, just brushing it with some olive oil, vinegar, throwing on the grill. Again, you get that smoky element. So I would say don't be afraid to play with different techniques and vegetables.
I mean, forget me. If you've got a grilled vegetable, you've still got that same smoky flavor.
Yeah, it's bigger.
Well, I am just really hungry right now, so I think we might need to move to the next topic, which will make me even hungrier. Salmon grilling season is upon us, but as we become more aware of the environmental impact of fishing, many of us are wondering whether it's entirely responsible to eat salmon. Should we choose farmed or wild, Pacific or Atlantic? Diane Morgan, you have written 2 cookbooks on salmon, the most recent being Salmon, Everything You Need to Know. And you've traveled everywhere from Norway to Scotland to Alaska to research salmon fishing and farming. So what do we need to know about salmon as we get into grilling season this year?
So Alaska has the most sustainable practices for maintaining healthy stocks of wild salmon. And my principle is you eat wild to save wild, because many of the small coastal towns in Alaska, their whole industry is fishing. And so whether it's the fishermen or the processors, those towns would just fall into complete unemployment if the salmon industry was not, and the fishing industry was not there. So you are actually being responsible to eat wild caught salmon. And Alaska has the strongest stocks year after year because their practices for maintaining those stocks are very strict.
So we don't have to worry about the dwindling wild salmon population, at least as far as Alaska goes.
Not as far as Alaska goes. Yes. And I've been to fish farms, and, the industry is, there's not enough wild salmon to feed the world and the demand.
And the price.
Yeah.
And the price. But if you buy wild caught salmon in season at the best prices, or you order it direct from a fisherman, which I do, I stock my freezer in the summer with 75 pounds, and I'm like one of those, as if I'm hoarding for the rest of the year. And so
for the next Y2K. Diane, I would love to know how to wrap fish effectively, because a lot of times I'll put something in the freezer, and even though I put it in a freezer grade bag, it gets a little freezer burn or whatever.
You need a food saver. You need to vacuum seal it. Vacuum sealing is, I finally bought one. And locally, when I can get, like when Alaskan sockeye, when that comes on the market and starts coming in at $10 a pound, I will get out my food saver and I, cut long sheets and I vacuum seal it.
Neat.
And then I put it in all of those fillets in an extra heavy bag. And so the other key tip is that you never thaw salmon at room temperature. You either put it in a big bowl of cold water or you thaw it in the refrigerator for 24 hours. But if you just don't want that complete change in temperature, then it breaks down the flesh.
Oh, that's interesting. I've been doing it wrong all this time.
You've just been doing it differently, Catherine. So in other words, you want a slow thaw.
Slow thaw.
Okay.
But it's like anything. It's really effective to put it in a big bowl of cold water. Mm-hmm. I can do that in the morning and be working at my desk, and in 2 hours, if it's submerged, it's thawed, and I just wipe off the package and has to be well vacuum sealed.
What about, I want to hear from each of you your foolproof way to cook salmon, because I feel like everyone's got their secret. Kathleen, do you have a salmon cooking secret?
I don't cook a lot of salmon at home because my husband is kind of averse to fish, flat fish. So, if I do it, it's on the rare occasion that I'm by myself or with my sister or something.
You have to sneak. You have to have secret salmon.
Exactly. I have a secret salmon. But, for me, simply grilled or, in parchment paper, I find for many fish is just kind of that foolproof way to make sure it doesn't overcook.
How about you, Diane? You must have 200 different foolproof
Well, when I wrote the second salmon book, I wrote the chapters are structured by technique. And so it's really what you're comfortable with. And since we're upon grilling season, I don't like to cook any fish directly on the grill grates. I like to do it a la plancha, and you can do anything like dedicate a cast iron skillet and put that on the grill and have it piping hot and put your fillets in that. But the flesh of fish sticks to the grill, and it's very frustrating to do that. And the other is the Native American technique of planking it, which is a fabulous way. A cedar or alder plank, I love it that way. You get some smoke. It's beautiful.
For me, I like to do the one-sided grilling. So I'll have a fillet that still has a skin on and put it on a grill that is kind of low. I feel intimidated talking about cooking techniques in front of Diane. But I'll put it on the grill on kind of low, and then I'll cover it. So it just slowly cooks from the bottom up, and it gets a little bit of, the convection sort of oven effect because I have the lid on. And that just keeps it so satiny and moist, because there's nothing harsh about it. And it's a little hard to sometimes know when it's done because sometimes the top doesn't actually look completely cooked, but if you just separate a flake or so, you can tell. I like it when it's a little rosy in the middle, but cooked otherwise.
Can we just take a second to talk about how amazing salmon are? I feel like every time I eat a wild salmon, I'm just like, this is such an amazing creature. They swim, Diane, like thousands and thousands of miles upriver to spawn from the ocean.
From the ocean. Back to their natal waters. That's what's so elegant about it. They are born and live as fry in freshwater, and then when they're large enough, they go into saltwater, and they live out in the ocean for 3 to 5 years, and then it's time to come back upstream. And they, in Alaska, the Copper River is the longest river that's fished for commercial fishing, and people say, well, I don't understand why the sockeye, what's the difference between a kenai but it's because they have to stock up so much fat because they know they have thousands of miles to go back upstream.
Oh, see, they're even more ingenious than you thought. It's an amazing system.
Right? Yeah, it's just mind-blowing. I think, you couldn't write a plot that had, the main character traveling thousands of miles and then traveling thousands of miles back only to mate and die. This is just...
I know.
And then we're eating it.
It sounds operatic.
Yes. Yeah, it really does. Yeah. Well, cheers to the most inspirational food of summer, I think. And thank you for writing a book about it. 2 books about it, Diane. Well, let's move on to our Stick to Your Ribs third course, the wonderful James Beard. Kathleen, I am so looking forward to seeing your new documentary film, America's First Foodie, The Incredible Life of James Beard. Let's take a moment and listen to a clip here.
James Beard was an enormously important figure in American cooking at a time when American cooking was really sort of a desert.
There wasn't a food world in the sense that we have one today. There was the women's magazines, and they had a lot of recipes, fast and easy.
Before Jim Beard, the average American table was meat and potatoes, and casseroles were made from canned soup.
It was much easier for the industry to just make it simple and put it in a box in a can and freeze it or package it and just sell it at a supermarket.
When James Beard came on the scene, teaching you how to cook, making you understand techniques and why you were doing something, there really had never been anything like it.
Kathleen, can you start us out with a 1-minute biography of this guy? Who was James Beard?
Okay, 1 minute. Ready, go. Portland native, James Beard was known as the Dean of American Cookery. He was a prolific writer of cookbooks, newspaper and magazine columns focused on cooking. He was the first to have a cooking show on television in 1946, and that's at a time when not everyone had television, and in fact at a time when people weren't sure that this new thing called TV was going to last. So he paved the way for people like Julia Child and Jacques Pepin and even the Food Network of today. James Beard was known for embracing American cuisine and ingredients at a time when everyone was looking to Europe. He was saying, why are people raving about the chanterelles in France when we have them right here in Oregon? He was also a passionate mentor and teacher. He taught classes here in Oregon and Seaside on the coast. He taught classes in his New York City townhouse and inspired so many chefs who became so influential in the food scene. People like Jonathan Waxman and Alice Waters and even Jacques Pepin. He also was the co-founder, and not a lot of people know this, of City Meals on Wheels with the writer Gail Green, which feeds the homebound elderly. And I think when they started, maybe in their first year, they raised something like $30,000. And today they're raising per year annually about $20 million and feeding millions and millions of homebound elderly people in New York City, which is incredible. So I think all of what James Beard stood for in the food world, locavorism, the advent of food television, having a social conscience about food and feeding people is definitely, he pioneered it for today. Was that 1 minute?
It's okay. We're not holding you to it. Diane, weren't you mentored by a chef who worked with James Beard?
I was. So my first cooking job, well, maybe my second. So it was after my second year of college, and I went to Reed, where James Beard was for 1 year, and he was kicked out. But so John Conway was a professor at the University of Washington, and he was friends with Beard. And they were at Carnegie Mellon together in Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And so John shared stories about Beard, and one of them is when they were at Carnegie Mellon together. One night after a party in their long raccoon coats, they went out to Fifth Avenue and flashed.
I love that, Diane, because not a lot of people know that, that Beard was kicked out of Reed College and essentially for being gay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then went to Carnegie Mellon for another year. He kind of bounced around, and when he was there, he was studying set design.
Interesting. What do we all think the legacy of Beard has been? I mean, of course, there's the James Beard House in New York, and with any luck, we'll have a James Beard Public Market in Portland in, now they're saying 2 years. We'll see. Martha, for you, what's James Beard's legacy been?
I think it's the validation of great food is all around you. You don't have to necessarily go to someplace more quote-unquote glamorous or go far. He obviously did that early, sort of lived that early in his kitchen, but I think it's a great thing to be reminded of. And I feel like his whole career, the fact that he was involved in a lot of commercial enterprises, he promoted things. He was a spokesperson. He really kind of hustled to make a life as a food writer and a food, media person. That is so modern now. Like, we're all looking at that. I mean, especially us in the room, but everybody now is realizing that branding matters, sponsorship matters. The line between being purely a cook and someone who's got a commercial aspect is way blurred now because of, blogging and everything else. So once again, it shows like that how kind of far ahead of his time and how much of a pioneer he was, that all that lifestyle is still relevant today.
Absolutely, Martha. And it's funny, we have a quote in the film that Clark Wolf, who's a restaurant consultant, says that back in James Beard's day, people would question if he would endorse something. And he would say that he endorsed only those things that he tested and believed in. And that today, if you don't have an endorsement deal as a popular chef, you are not a person.
Well, Kathleen, he was a big guy, right? I mean, was he tall as well? I mean, he was very large.
Yes.
And I remember reading in the David Camp book, The United States of Arugula. I love that book. It kind of brings to life all these historic American culinary characters. That part of the reason he did so well is that people said, "Oh, this guy obviously eats well." Like his look, he wasn't svelte, but his look really worked for him.
It was his look, his presence, I think. He was large and he had a booming voice and a big personality. Everything about him was big, so I think that was very effective in his being an influence, no matter what he was doing or where he was.
Diane, do you have any other, I'm trying to think, major historic food characters in American history that really stand out for you?
Well, my second mentor was this woman, Alma Locke, who lived in Chicago, and she was food editor at the Sun-Times for 20 years, and then she started the avocational cooking school, and I was her assistant for 5 years, and she was of the same era as Julia Child, but she was published by the University of Chicago Press, and so it's sort of she didn't have that same. She was well known in Chicago. She didn't have that really broad aspect, but she wrote this fabulous book on the hows and whys of French cooking. And so it's just that it was with John Conway, Beard, that era, and Alma, it was just these really strong personalities that really, I think, shaped the food world when I went into it.
It's kind of like the Beatles, When the Beatles emerged on the scene, they were one of a kind, and they just did it. They were just like, we're doing what we want to do. And of course, it was so incredibly powerful. And nowadays, everything is music in particular is so thought out and marketed and produced, et cetera. I don't think you could, no matter how talented you are, I don't think you could have that same impact that the Beatles had. And I think that's the same thing for people like James Beard, Alma, Pepin, even Martha Stewart, for gosh sake, in the early days. It wasn't happening. They invented it, and they did it in a very genuine way. They didn't focus group it to death the way everything is now.
Yeah, or Julia Child. Yeah, I mean,
right.
It's not that unusual these days to go to cooking school in Paris.
Yeah,
but at the time it was really something.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, Martha, because James Beard, he didn't set out to become this world-famous cook. He wanted to be an opera singer. He wanted to be an actor, and he did what he was essentially good at and what he was brought up really learning. So it's interesting how he kind of, after not fitting in the right mold, became exactly who he was supposed to be.
So, Kathleen, after going through this process of making this film, what was the most surprising thing you learned about James Beard?
One of the most surprising things I learned about James Beard that unfortunately we had to end up leaving on the cutting room floor. We had over 100 hours of footage, and we had to cram it into a PBS hour, which is not even quite an hour. But how influential a Chinese cook in his home was to his life. His name was Juliet, and he was a surrogate father to James Beard. And James Beard learned so much about cooking from him as well. Let, as they called him, was at first a cook in James Beard's mother's boarding house here in Portland. And then when she closed the boarding house, he came to cook for the family. And James Beard's father was always coming and going and not much of a father. But Let, who was always around, was more of that father figure to James Beard. And if you look at him later in life, he was always wearing these kind of the soft Chinese cotton shoes and these embroidered Chinese jackets. And those were kind of a nod to that upbringing from him. And he brought the world to James Beard's childhood.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm excited to see the film, and I think maybe it's time to move on to dessert, where we each share something that we've been enjoying this week. I'll go first. I just got back from a trip to Basque Country. I don't even know where to begin. Everything was so delicious and wonderful. The local cheese, asau irati, I'm probably mispronouncing that. Sheep's milk cheese with black cherry preserves was so good. The dry hard cider was so good. The wines were so good. But my most transporting moment, I think, was standing in the vineyards above the town of Guetaria. These are Chacoli vineyards, which Chacoli is a very brisk, frothy, low-alcohol wine. And the wind is coming off the Bay of Biscay, and it's just very brisk and chilly, and you're just looking at the sparkling sea, and you're up in these hills looking down and looking at these vines kind of swaying in the wind, and it's just transporting. So if anyone gets a chance, go to Chacoli country, go to Guetaria, and just stand in the vineyards and soak it all up. Kathleen, did you bring a dessert item for us today?
Yes, I did. I am excited about actually this trend in food films taking a closer look and a deeper dive. I saw last week the Jeremiah Tower documentary. It's called The Last Magnificent. And I thought it was really beautifully shot and wonderfully done, and so much more than about cooking and inspiration, and I really thought it was wonderful. And also, there's the Dan Barber film Wasted, that's about food waste, and it's not only about how we're wasting food, but it offers solutions. So I think that's very exciting. Mike Solomonov has a documentary called In Search of Israeli Food that's coming out this month. There's a documentary about the Four Seasons restaurant in the works. So I think it's nice to see that the genre isn't being over-glamorized. It's kind of really telling the stories that have been there all along and taking a deeper dive.
Great recommendations. Thank you. Sounds good. How about you, Diane?
I'm going to go back to roots because now that the spring roots are in the market, it pains me when I go to the farmer's market and someone will say, "Oh, do you want the tops of the carrots?" And they'll go, "Oh, no, just compost them." And I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, make carrot top pesto and take the radish tops and make soup. It's like a double reward that you get the roots and you get the tops. And like Tokyo turnips, the greens, you can saute the roots and you can saute the tops. And it's so delicious. And it's... Talk about food waste. There's no food waste. You can even chop up the stems and get a little crunch in there. And so it's just like a little flag waving for me to say, don't toss away
It's free food.
It's free food.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember a couple of those pestos in your cookbook, Martha, I think.
Yeah, definitely. A lot with the radish tops because they tend to be in pretty good shape. You know, radishes don't grow for a long time, so they're not sitting out in the field getting muddy and all that. So radish tops are great. Carrot tops, as Diane says. Yeah, chop them up, cook them, saute them. Fantastico.
And how about your dessert item?
Well, I'm going to offer something not to eat, but something that we can put our drinks in, because I know we all enjoy drinks. I have this current obsession with lowball glasses, old-fashioned glasses. I spent a little bit of time in Kentucky recently for work and got a deep fondness for bourbon now. And I'm having an event where there'll be a lot of people, and I want to have really cool old-fashioned glasses. So as I started looking for them, I discovered a style where it's just a wide silver band around the top, just a nice simple glass, either the roly-poly style or just kind of slope-sided. And as I've started kind of seeking those out, I learned that other people are seeking them out. They're inspired or created by a designer named Dorothy Thorpe, who was designing in the 60s, probably 50s, 60s, 70s. And that was her signature, was that silver band. And they're just so elegant and cool looking. So I've gotten a few on eBay with eBay prices, but I just was at the Goodwill the other day.
Oh.
And there were two, whether they're authentic, I don't know, but there were two that were 49 cents. And then some other kind of things that went along with that style. Just a nice, clean, feels good in the hand cocktail glass.
Nice. Everyone stay off eBay until Martha's done.
Yeah, I debated
assembling.
whether I was even going to share this. But I've got them also.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Martha Holmberg, my former boss at the Oregonian, and the former editor-in-chief and publisher of Fine Cooking. And also thank you for extending summer and adding 2 more sub-seasons.
Right. Especially in Oregon, we need to stretch summer as long as we can.
And thank you, Diane Morgan. I love that your cookbook, Roots, the Definitive Compendium, with more than 225 recipes, won a James Beard Award, as did this very show. So it's been fun to talk about James Beard today and kind of connect all the dots. And Kathleen Squires, who has written for publications like Saveur and the Wall Street Journal. Congratulations on the move to documentary filmmaker. I can't wait to see America's First Foodie.
Thank you so much.
Hey, listeners, we need your help. Please make it easier for your friends to find our show by subscribing to and rating The Four Top on iTunes, NPR One, Stitcher, or however you get your podcasts. It only takes a few seconds and it helps us so much. At facebook.com/thefourtop, you can suggest topics for us to discuss. And tweet us, please, at @4top, all one word. Today's IACP and James Beard award-winning show was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon in the studios of OPB. You can read all about us on the OPB website. Our producer is Alex Ward. Special thanks to OPB sound supervisor Stephen Cray. And our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. I hope you can join us for our next episode, and like I said before, please tell your friends about the Four Top. Bye-bye now.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Et tiens, quelqu'un a laissé un pourboire.